Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Just Tiltum. We are 3 weeks into the LCS, and TSM is on the rise. It's looking like. So this week I'm joined again by Harry
Hey.
and Kantos,
Hey, everybody.
and we're going to be breaking down our league matches as well as giving a little bit of a preview for some other TSM related esports events coming up in the near future. But if everybody's all prepared, we can go ahead and jump right into what the rioters like to call El Clasico. Um, so we had TSM versus CLG this week, and there were a lot of interesting things that happened in this game. I guess for me personally, one of the things that stood out to me was Bjergsen had some questionable positioning, and Hanser is still a beast. You know, who knew? So I actually want to go ahead and hop right into game one. And speaking of Hanser, he was a beast for pretty much all weekend, but his first game was on this GP pick. Now, we ended up losing game one. We took the series overall, but we lost game one. And we saw Sven on Ivern, new champions for Sven. And I don't think that Gangplank is a very frequent pick for Hanser. I can't recall him playing it frequently at all.
When it was meta, I think probably he played it. But
He did.
obviously,
He played it a couple of times. It was
Mhm.
never something that he had a rousing success on, but
Right.
when it was meta, he did play it a couple of times.
Right. So we saw it here again. And I mean, 1-3-0, not really. He came back. I guess mid game he had his farm up, ended it with 218 farms. So he was farming well overall. But I don't think that it's really what TSM was looking for. And Harry, I'm gonna go to you first. I think that this first CLG game, I mean, we saw who he's Aurelion Sol, but what are your thoughts really on Hunter and this Gangplank?
he played the really early laning phase really greedily, and he got first blooded for it. And he had to go back and buy Cole, which is like that's not your Tobias Fate level 1. That's a terrible start for a Gangplank. He really needs to just, as a Gangplank, I think the rule of thumb is you want to stay in lane for as long as possible. You just want to keep getting gold. You don't want like frequent backs. And getting first blooded and having to buy a Cole, it's pretty depressing. You want to get that Triforce power spike as soon as possible. But to Hunter's credit, he did play back for the rest of the lane phase. Which is kind of what you're supposed to do as Gangplank in the first place, to be honest. So I don't think that's what lost us the game, and we did manage to stabilize around the other lanes. I don't think Gangplank specifically was the problem with us this game. I think our problem came in the mid game, but definitely it's supposed to be a counter to the Maokai. I think is one of the reasons Hauser sided for picking it, and the fact that it did that kind of went away when he got killed first blooded, I think really hurt TSM's early game and hurt their momentum going into the mid game for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And one of the things that I guess really dictated that first blood was Huhi, of course, on his, I guess at this point, famous Aurelion Sol pick. However, I mean, he ended the game 1-1-8, and it didn't feel as impactful to me this time around. I mean, in the past we've seen Huhi, they'll be pulling in 1-3-1, and all of a sudden there's a giant dragon derping its way down from the river, and you get stunned and blown up, and he just kind of floats away laughing. And who he has carried entire series with just his Aurelion Sol pick. This time around, not so much. I mean, he had that first blood. It put Haunter behind in lane terribly. But Kantos, I'm wondering, is this a bad meta for Aurelion Sol, in your opinion, or was it just that we were able to more effectively neuter who he's Aurelion Sol pick in this particular game?
Oh, well, so I think the Aurelion Sol is supposed to be that pocket pick. It's supposed to be essentially how Bjergsen Syndra used to be, where it was that champion that they're known for and they can pretty much dominate almost anybody with. The Frog and Zenivia, if you will. And I think that's what they were going for again on this Aurelion Sol pick. This is something that's tilted TSM in the past, and Bjergsen can't bug his way out of this one. But it just didn't have the impact that I think that they were looking for, and I don't know if that's because the Corki matchup was a decent matchup against it. I mean, Corki in the end still outfarmed him, even though it was only by 5 or 6 CS. It still was he outfarmed him at the end, or at least stayed even with him for the most part. So I think I agree. It just didn't feel like it was the impactful pick that they were really going for. I don't know if it was necessarily him being outside of the meta, because the biggest thing for pro players is it's not necessarily about the meta. It's how comfortable you are on a champion. So if it's a champion that again, Froggen's still playing Anivia, and he's, in terms of lane, is doing really, really well. It's more about how comfortable you feel playing it. So I wouldn't really attribute the lack of success on this to be a meta thing, as much as I would it just didn't. I don't think that TSM were as phased. I don't think that Huhi had as much opportunity for roam. Again, he did early, but it was just about it. So I just don't think that it was as impactful and as groundbreaking as CLG was really hoping it would be.
I would like to follow that up though. That TSM did ban Aurelion Sol for the rest of the series. So they saw a problem with it. In game 2 they banned it in the first phase. In game 3 they did ban it in the second phase. Granted, man got picked, but it's obvious TSM just didn't feel like really dealing with this champion.
Right.
And you see the scoreline 1-1 and 8, like that's not great, but you have to realize that it's not only just like, okay, well he only got one kill, but what did TSM have to do to avoid him getting kills?
Right.
Might be the annoying part about dealing with this pick, not necessarily what it does, but what it can do and how it can affect the map. And I think TSM for the rest of the series made a bandit saying there's stuff we want to do in the early game that this pick prohibits. And so I think that's like one of the things you have to take into consideration when you have a champion as powerful and roaming as Brilliant Soul.
Oh, I agree, and I think that another example of that is kind of the Shen, where it's not even necessarily that it itself is an overpowered pick, but the amount of pressure that it can output and the amount of, I guess, potential, not to use a word that is memeously famous. But it does have a lot of potential for that team fighting and for that comp. In terms of the Shen, and I think that's what TSM were kind of afraid of for this Aurelion Sol. So I definitely agree with you, Harry. I definitely think that for getting rid of it the rest of those games, it's something that they just didn't want to deal with, a pressure they just didn't want to worry about.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things across this entire weekend, in my opinion, has actually been the totality of the pick ban phase. Of course, we moved over to the 10 ban system, so three picks to begin with, and then we get three champions out the way, then we get 2 additional picks, which I think kind of segues us nicely into game 2. But on a real quick note, I do want to ask both of you guys, in terms of an MVP for game 1, who are you thinking? We'll go with
okay. So it's. Oh, sorry. It didn't mean to jump in there.
No, go ahead.
It's kind of tough because you look at Xmithy, who had 100% kill participation. 5-1 and 6, a really good score. Did a pretty decent job, kind of pushing that game forward. But I think the really big turning point was that Maokai. I think that Darshan just output so much damage. He put so much good pressure on the map. He's the one that capitalized on that face check that turned the entire game around. He got another pick onto Turtle later on and was just keeping the game moving forward. So I would have to say Darshan.
All right, and what about you, Harry?
I would agree, Darshan. And one of the other things this pick, it might be the pick, not the champion, but TSM could not deal with this pick at team fights. I remember on Twitter, Weldon was saying TSM won this game because of the team comp, and then the team fights happened. And I don't know, it didn't feel like in the mid game, especially when GP only had a Triforce, and Corki and Jin just aren't really tank killers. Like, you don't, especially Jin, you don't really think of them as tank killers at all. So I think it's also a bit that, yes, it's the composition, but also, I mean, he was 2-1-9. He did 20% of his team's damage, which is good, obviously good for Maokai. And yeah, it just seemed he did more than his ADC. He's a Sivir.
Yeah.
ADC in 2017, lol. But yeah, so, and yeah, he just played really well this game. He itemized well, and he just played a tank well, which he did not do for the rest of the series. So yeah, I thought he played the learning phase well. He set up that first blood very nicely, even though he's supposed to be a counter matchup. I think he just played solid overall this game. I think he was a big reason CLG was able to win this game.
Yeah, I agree. And as you kind of alluded to, we didn't really see a repeat performance out of Darshan in game two. One of the big question marks, I'm sure
Jesus Christ.
the
I'd have
pick heard
flamed the
around
living
the world,
shit out of
as it
him.
were, uh, was leaving Camille open for TSM to pick up. And, you know, every season, every meta, there are just certain champions that you always take off the table. For most of the seasons, it's been LeBlanc because, in my opinion, she's just a broken piece of whatever. But right now, Camille is who you just don't let people get. Her mobility is insane. She can stun you from 2 screens away. She has true damage. She can slow you. She can prevent you from running away. She has pretty much everything a top laner needs to just say, we're going to win this game. And CLG gave it away to TSM. Hanser picked it up, went 5-1-7, and I one of the things I kind of want to zero in on is maybe Darshan beginning to tilt because we had a tower dive this game, guys, and I think it left a few people with a question marks. Kantos, what was your opinion? What was going through your mind when Darshan pulled that tower dive?
So I just want to preface this by just letting the audience know here that in our notes for this episode, we put so many question marks next to leaving Camille open because it was such a why. It was such a why. So and this dive, which frankly it wasn't necessarily that horrible of a dive. It was kind of questionable and it definitely felt desperate because it was kind of a why exactly is Darshan diving at this point? Why does he feel the need to go so hard at this moment? And it did kind of feel like desperation, but it wasn't necessarily as bad of a dive as it was a great play by Hanser. I mean, he flashes right out of that Poppy ult and gets a great ultimate onto Darshan under tower for an easy pickup. I mean, it just felt like a really desperate play from Darshan, and I think that was just kind of the theme of Darshan's play. This entire game too was desperation.
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe there was some confusion in the pick ban phase. Maybe Darshan came into the pick with a little more confidence. I mean, Poppy does have her shield, which can shut down Camille's attempts to get in on you once, but then Camille can keep coming back. And maybe there was some sort of breakdown in communication, but Darshan really seemed to be seeing red this game. And Harry, we were all talking about earlier that chase down the river where it seemed like Darshan did everything in his God-given power to try to get to Hanser, and it just didn't work out.
So Darshan's Poppy. So there is a lot wrong with what Darshan did when he chased Hanser. Okay, so if there was like a Professional League of Legends 101, right? And you're sitting down in class, right? And you got Professor Freak or whoever the fuck is the professor, right? The first thing they would do is they would draw the mini map, right? And then they would say, if you are making a play on one side of the map, you cannot make a play on the other side of the map, right? You can't do that. That's just not what you do. CLG was making a play on the bottom. They ganked bottom. Their jungler was bottom. All their pressure's bottom. And Darshan goes to the ends of the earth in the top lane to get to the, literally running towards the enemy team to get the Camille, who, by the way, has one of the best escapes in the game. I mean, it's the closest thing to intentional feeding I've seen in a League of Legends match. I mean, I don't know. And this is a veteran. Darshan's one of the longest standing pros right now. There's only Aphromoo, maybe he's been around longer. It actually boggles my mind that Darshan went for this play. It's gonna go, in my opinion, down as one of the biggest misplays I have ever seen. This is extremely basic. I'm pretty confident that even I wouldn't go for that, and I'm freaking plat. And I suck. I mean, that was an amazingly bad play. That was one of the worst plays I've ever seen. So I don't know what
he popped that flash too. He
threw everything
was...
while running straight towards Bjergsen, and I think Sven was with him. I don't know. He just ran directly towards the enemy team. When, I mean, you look at your freaking mini map, none of your teammates are around. You're making a play in the river, on TSM side of the map. What? I mean, I just have no words for how bad of a play that was. Yeah, that was phenomenally bad. I don't know. And not only that, it would have been one thing if he was doing that against like, I don't know, a Maokai. He did that against a Camille. Like, what? This is already one of the most You're already playing with fire. Okay, you're already playing with one of the most broken champions, in my opinion, in the history of League of Legends. Why are you giving her more gold? Why are you giving her assists? This is one of the last champions you want to pull this shit on. Like, oh my god. Like, yeah, that.
Yeah.
Like there, I don't know. Like, I mean, as a TSM fan, like I'm upset that he tried to do that. Like, I mean, I would be upset if I was Hotzer because I'd feel like personally offended that I have to play against this piece of shit. Like, I mean, oh my god, I mean, yeah. Okay. Anyway, the reason we won this game, however, is because we had Camille. I mean, Hotzer, when there's literally a player sitting down and saying we won that game because we literally have this champion. I mean, that should give you a pretty good idea how broken the freaking champion is. And if your plan to get rid of a Camille is a Poppy, I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think Six is one of the best coaches in the league. I think he's got a great strategic mind. I think his drafts, I think, and way back in the Madison Square Garden finals and the Las Vegas finals are terrific. I don't know. This was a huge brain fart. I have no idea what he was thinking. And he banned Syndra instead, which hasn't even been. I don't know. This game from CLG is like the most counter logic you can get. This is the most CLG of CLG games you can get.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that.
But yeah, oh my god.
I can't pretend to fathom what was possibly what kind of discussions they were having during this pick ban, where, you know, they leave up Camille, they try to counter it with the Poppy. You know, then we have the Graves pick, which wasn't terrible, but wasn't terribly impactful. Bjergsen popped off a bit on Corki. I mean, Corki's a bit of free damage right now. You press Q, you press R, people just go boom. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can really wrap my mind around the idea of leaving up quite literally the most broken champion available in League of Legends currently in an effort to do something. I mean, but
yeah, it doesn't. I don't know what their plan was. I don't know. Like, there's no clear. Like, is the Morgana there? I don't.
Yeah,
know.
I mean, you know,
like,
looking at the team comp, trying to piece it together, I just don't see what the strategy was for this particular team comp. I mean,
yeah, this one's. Yeah, I mean, everything CLG this game.
Yeah, it's a question mark in and of itself, and it'll probably go down in the CLG history as one of the most self-defeating pick bans they've ever allowed to happen.
Yeah, I feel for you CLG fans. This must have been so hard to watch.
It could not have been fun to watch TSM and Hunter, one of the
I hate CLG, but
yeah.
Oh man, if this was painful for me to watch, then I can't even imagine what it's like as a faithful CLG. Shout out to Risen Lazarus. You know, you're a trooper, dude. Like, Risen Lazarus is a CLG fan on Twitter, and he's just. I think he actually I think last week was the first time he actually turned off his CLG game and watched another game. He was like, I can't anymore, dude. So it's like, this is just. I think it was the Dig series. They 2-0'd that series, but even then it was just like, God, like this is not good. But yeah, CLG just. Yeah. Wow. I can't even analyze TSM's play this game. It's like they're fighting a bot. Like, I mean, oh my god. Like, I don't like. What can you really infer about TSM's quality of play from this game? Like, anyone would have won this game. Like, I honestly believe any other professional team in the world. Like, I can't think of a professional team that would lose this game. Like, maybe there's some wildcard team in like freaking Turkey that I don't know about that literally like ints every game, but. That's like, this is the freest win I think I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't know how you can lose this game unless you just don't have any, like, you have actually like a bunch of gold players. Like, that's how bad CLG played this game. It was a 25-minute game. Like, wow.
A lot of the numbers I think the numbers really do speak for themselves when you, like, if you go back in history and you look at this game, this will be the one that CLG gave away. But despite all the power behind that Camille pick, what we were discussing in terms of MVP for this series was actually Biofrost. Once again, we see him on his Thresh. You know, we picked him up as a Thresh 1 trick, and he's kind of showing why Thresh was his champion. I mean, over the course of the entire weekend, he had great Thresh plays, but, you know, I've yet to see a questionable performance out of Biofrost on Thresh, which I guess would be expected as a Thresh one trick, but it seems like in particular he he kind of inhabits a different role in the team when he's on that champion where everybody plays a little looser because the lantern will be there to save me, or Biofrost is going to land that one hook or get that flay off or walk up in lane. I mean, even when Biofrost is on Thresh with Wild Turtle in lane, they're playing more aggressive. He'll just walk up and flay people back and hook, and people just die. So I guess going to you first, Cantos. In terms of, I guess, Biofrost's Thresh play this game, how are you feeling about it in terms of him being an MVP for this particular Camille-ridden game?
This is another kind of interesting one to try and put an MVP on because everybody on TSM did so very, very well. It was great to see the Lee Sin coming out as Svenskeren, always a great pick. The Camille was obviously so much fun. Corki went absolutely off, and Wild Turtle did exactly what was expected and what was needed of him to do. But man, Thresh with some of those hooks, the Morgana was picked intentionally to counter that Thresh, and it just did not work. Bio was still landing the hooks, and okay, you got the spell shield, but here comes Bio anyway to throw in that flay into that ultimate. It was just so good how well he just played around the entire map. I mean, his lanterns were clutch, his hooks were really good, they were really solid. It just was one of those things. A lot of people have been kind of questioning Biofrost and saying, well, was it just double lift covering Biofrost's ass, or is Biofrost really as good as they say? And he really kind of stepped up to say, like, yeah, okay, I deserve to be on this team, I deserve to be in this game, and I can show that I can do work, and that's exactly what he did in this game, and honestly this whole weekend, but we'll kind of touch on that later. But yeah, so that's why I would kind of give Thresh the MVP here. He did a lot of good, like you said. He allowed the team to play safer, play smarter, know that Thresh was going to get that lantern out, he was going to get that hook on him. It felt like a much more at ease TSM.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of on the topic of them playing at ease, I'm going to you now, Harry. Moving into Game 3, in terms of comfort champions, we get Hanser on his infamous Maokai, with every TriSM meme in the world going crazy in Twitch chats.
TriSM!
And this game was, I mean, I personally love Azir. I know a lot of people hate him. I think he's actually a very cool champion. I think his concept is really well done, and his numbers are just kind of crazy. But we got Bjergsen on Azir, Turtle had another Jhin game, Biofrost had another Thresh game, and Hanser got his Maokai, and boy did he perform on his Maokai. So you want to kind of walk us through a bit of this game, Harry?
Yeah. So from what I remember of this game, the early game was quiet, and I think pretty even for the most part. Both of these compositions are really, if you just look at them, these are really team fighting compositions. None of them are really laning or really laning dominant champions being picked here. Even Ivern, I think to some extent, is a bit more of a mid-game champion when you get that Daisy for those skirmishes. And so I think both teams had traumatic experiences in the laning phase because both of them ended pre-30 minutes. And so they just decided, I guess, handshaked, okay, let's just go to 40 minutes. Well, this was a 32-minute game, but it still felt like a very long game to me. And yeah, because we have an Azir, we have a Maokai, we have an Ivern, so we're just going to farm up, and we're going to wait until Maokai is just an unkillable, unsolvable monster, and you got Daisy, and Ivern, who are pretty... Ivern did build AP, but he's just naturally brings an extra person. Daisy's pretty powerful, actually, so it's almost like it's a 65 team fight. You got the Azir for very consistent DPS. And credit to CLG, I actually did not think the level of this game, this was probably the highest level of all 3 games played, in my opinion. I think their team fighting was pretty admirable this game, to be fair. I really think that they made a lot of these fights closer than they should be on paper. Because I think Nautilus just isn't as good of a team fighter as a Maokai. I don't think Orianna is as good of a team fighter as Zero. That Silver's probably a better team fighter than Jhin, but I definitely think TSM had the edge in team fighting. So I give a lot of credit to CLG for most of this game. They did keep it close. But when you see they only got one tower in the end, they only got one Drake. TSM always felt like they're kind of in the driver's seat this game, and eventually it did. At around 30 minutes, this game really broke open for TSM, and they were able to get a few really key team fight victories and close out this game. But I felt like CLG of all the games, this was probably even over. I'd say this was probably a better game from them. Over game one, because there was that gangplank incident, there was that huge misplay by Bjergsen in the mid lane in game one. So this game felt like neither team was making very huge mistakes early on. So I felt like this game was pretty high level, and TSM managed to be the better macro team overall. It felt like.
Yeah, I agree, and I really do think that this was as you said, a higher level of macro play from both teams, which is always a joy to see. It's always nice to not watch your favorite team run down mid lane and be slaughtered constantly. But one of the things that stood out to me was this was like a mini redemption game for Darshan. He played Nautilus, as you mentioned, and, just so often he was exactly what his team needed to be, which was a giant wall who disrupted things. And Kantos, there was a Baron fight in particular that I want you to kind of take us into, where Darshan to me, he embodied the concept of, I am the tank and you're not getting past me.
Yeah, it was a fight near Baron, and it was one of the really big team fights that later would kind of turn in TSM's favor. But in the start of it, Nautilus was just sitting pretty much in front of that entire team fight, and TSM was throwing almost everything that they could at him. It was just a constant barrage onto this Nautilus that just was not dying. I mean, that's if you're doing your good front to back team fighting, which TSM has always been very solid at, you bring down your tanks and then you push into their back line there. They've never been somebody to dive extremely far into the back and then hope that you can kind of bring yourself forward. So they're trying to go for their front to back team fighting, which it just wasn't. Nautilus just wasn't having it. He just wasn't moving. He was an actual and literal wall. And it kind of reached a point where I'm watching these games and I'm thinking, okay, I understand the concept of front-to-back team fighting. You don't necessarily want to leave this Haunter behind you, but all that we're doing at this point is just, smacking our hands against the castle wall and hoping that it falls down. We need to do something else different. And it reached a point where he decided to overstep a little bit to try and take Biofrost. He got a really good pick onto Biofrost in our backline there, but it took him one step too far. And what I really love about TSM in this fight, and it was something that they did really, really well, was that all of a sudden, I mean, it was on a dime, they immediately turned Haunter out of nowhere, out of just being literally in the front line, just harassing the Nautilus, just bam, jumps straight onto him, and the entire fight changes. And that was exactly what I was looking for, maybe a little earlier, is to kind of have our super beefy Maokai, try and hit somebody that was a little closer to the front line there, past the Nautilus, and just kind of trying to ignore the Nautilus and get to their back line. Because as soon as he went down, the entire team crumbled. At that point, we took like 3 more kills and just walked right to Baron, and it was no problem. So, to be fair, again, Darshan did a great job just being what he needed to be, which was that literal wall. But as soon as he overstepped, as soon as they took one misstep, we capitalized on it really, really well.
Yeah, and I think that this is a kind of evolving theme that we're seeing with this season's TSM. Last season with Double Lift, we had a lot of decisive, aggressive calls where TSM wants to take bot tower, and everybody's going to commit to taking bot tower, and you're probably going to die while they're doing it. And of course, we lost a bit of that decision and that, I guess you could almost say, play action, and to kind of import a term from another sport. But I think we're actually seeing a bit of an evolution in TSM's strategic diversity, because Harry and I, we were gushing all over last week about Bjergsen's Rise play, where do we give up the inhibitor or do we give it to Baron? Oh crap, we lost both. And even as you mentioned, Kantos, in this series, where in an instant, instead of it being our top laner overextended, we have to save him, it seemed like TSM was one mind, where there's Huhi, let's get him, let's change this whole fight. And they do it on a dime. And like you said, it changed the entire look and the entire scope of the fight. And we ended up taking that series. So El Clasico went to TSM again. I think, do either of you know what the standing record is between TSM and CLG?
Before the last two, well, not summer, but before summer 2015 and spring 2016, we were like pretty far in the lead. And and I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that now after that it's pretty bad.
It was 12 to 19 before. It was 12 to 19 before that match. I'm not sure.
I think it may be
game
wins.
Yeah, it sounds like game wins if they're able to catch up that quickly. Yeah, so yeah, it's 12 to 19. So I guess 21 to no, yeah, 21 to
21-13 now. So either way, TSM is still winning, which is seems to be the running moral of the story, outside of a slip up at Madison Square Garden that will
and the heartbreaker in Vegas.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
Yeah, but moving on.
Going to more winning.
We're actually gonna transition now into the P1 game, and P1 gave us our only loss last split. We went 17-1, or if you're a diehard TSM fan and you have your blinders on, we went 17-0, and coming into this season, they actually looked very strong. Last season they had flashes of brilliance, and they grew into a strong middle of the pack team by the end of the season. That was right around the time that they handed TSM their first loss and only loss. But this season coming in, they're actually a very, very well-rounded, very solid team. And, they picked up Arrow, who I think was a great pickup at AD carry. A lot of people were calling for him to maybe be on TSM. They've got Zig, Inori, Ryu, another great pickup. We took him away from H2K, 5.5K, lol. And also Adrian, who, personally, I'm kind of left and right on Adrian, but whatever. So coming into the P1 series, it's kind of evolved from, oh, hey, it's P1 to, hey, it's P1. We need to actually buckle down. I think this was the series this weekend. We actually stood a strong chance of losing just by quality of play across the entire map. And I'll admit, after game one, I was feeling a little nervous. We had Haunter on the Jace pick, Sven on Rek'Sai, Bjergsen on his Cassio, Turtle and Biofrost were Jhin and Zyra respectively. But Kantos, well, let's look at that Jace pick first. Haunter went 0-2, and I just don't think it panned out for what they wanted. Similar to the Gangplank pick in the CLG series.
It kind of felt like it was meant to be BM. It kind of felt like it was supposed to be kind of a jab at Zig, who's like a known Jace player. And they even said it in their trash talk. I believe that Haunter at one point said that he's a better Jace. And so it kind of felt like it was intended to be BM. I know that Jace is like a semi-viable pickup in the top lane. It has its strengths. But it just didn't really pan out to exactly what they needed here. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily a bad pick. I just don't think that that's what they needed. I don't think that it's what they were hoping to look for here. I understand that they wanted, that pressure in the top lane and that poke, and that's all well and good. But it just didn't seem to flow in as well with this comp that they were going for here. And it clearly looks like Zig knows how to play against the Jace, being a Jace man himself. So yeah, again, I won't sit here and say that it was a horrible pick and he never should have done it. It just didn't. I don't think it worked out the way that they were really hoping that it would.
Yeah, and I agree. And two of the I guess brightest stars on P1 right now for me are Inori and Arrow. I guess you can't really express a lot of surprise for Arrow coming in and being great, but we saw him on Varus for 2 games. No, I'm sorry, for just this one game. But the guy doesn't seem to miss skill shots
he's a beast
ever.
I think he's the best Korean, the best new Korean port so far for sure. He's a beast. He's laning pretty well with Adrian. I don't think their lane is dominant necessarily, but yeah, he's been playing team fights really well. His DPM is really good. He's just a skull. Arrow's also such an annoying. I don't know. It's like AD carries in Korea. They got Bang, Arrow. It's like what are these like? It's like they chose their role, then they chose their name. I don't know why. and whenever you cast an Arrow game, it's like, God forbid he's playing Ashe or something, and you just every time you'll But anyway, that's just a thought that came to my head, and I want to get that out. But anyway, so game one, I feel like what really hurt, we had a pretty good early game actually. I think we got first blood and first tower back to back, and it was actually a really good start. We got like I want to say like a 2K gold lead at some point in the early game, and it was looking pretty good for us. And then we started trading towers back and forth, and it was really this gentleman's agreement. It was a really respectful, like, okay, we're gonna trade bot tier 1 for top tier 1, bot tier 2 for mid tier 1, stuff like that. Really respectful trades, right? And it felt like Phoenix 1 was always just a little bit ahead in the tempo, and TSM wasn't able to keep up in a pure, macro game straight up. And that's what and then eventually when we had the Baron, when Baron comes up and teams are playing around Baron, they outplayed us and they are able to secure Baron twice this game. We actually got it once. I don't remember how we got it. I have no clue. But yeah, I felt like for a lot of this game, Phoenix 1 just out. They looked like the better team, honestly, after game 1. They just looked like they had their rotations together. They were just doing really solid on side lane pressure. They just looked like a really good team. But then, obviously, we ended up winning the series. But yeah, game 1 was really impressive from Phoenix 1. They just looked sharp. They looked like a top 3 team. And Nori, or I think Nori is our player of the game. He had a 706 on Kha'Zix. I think you could conclusively say he out-juggled Svenskeren in this particular game. And yeah, they just had a very Ryu had a monster. Everyone just really contributed to this game in a really solid way. Solid KDAs across the board, only 2 deaths. So yeah, this was just a really impressive game. This is why we were scared of Phoenix 1 coming into this weekend. They just looked really, really, really solid. And then you go into game 2 and game 3.
Yeah, so, and I agree. I like I said, after watching that game 1, it was kind of like these are my worst fears coming true moment, where it wasn't, I don't think at any point it was that TSM looked bad. There were some questionable decisions. I think there was a moment where they could have probably pressed for more objectives than what they did. And there was a question of bot lane priority.
Yeah, and bot lane, I do want to point out, their bot lane went 0-6-0.
Yeah.
And that was really ugly. And I know we just criticized the Jace pick, but he did do 36% of our team's damage. Which she's a poke champ, that's kind of expected, but still. It felt like our bot lane in particular got a bit abused by the Varus Nami. And yeah, it felt like we weren't necessarily being outlaned, but it was concerned that the gold was kept close, even though we got first blood and first turret. Yeah, okay, that's all I want to say about that.
Right. So then coming into game 2, we have Sven on Rengar. I think, fun side note, I don't think TSM has lost with a Rengar pick since we've had Sven on the rocket. Because I think he's played Rengar maybe 3 times, and he hasn't been the reason we've won those 3 times, but we also didn't lose because of the Rengar.
Yeah.
So we had Bjergsen on Echo, which another personal favorite of mine. Turtle on Ashe, Bifrost on Karma. We've seen plenty of that. But once again, our boy Hanser stepping up this game with the Shen, 6-1 and 10 against Ziggs Nautilus. And I think that was kind of the story of game 2. TSM were able to set up a really strong 1-3-1. And Kantos, just really looking at this team comp, how scary would this be to see a champ select?
It's so much CC, it's so much lockdown. You obviously have the Shen taunt, you have the Rengar, he can root. You obviously have Echo who can stun, you have Ashe with an arrow, you have Karma who also has a stun. It's just so much CC. And if all of these, especially with Shen, Rengar, and Echo, if these guys are coming at you, you don't even need a front line because you just have such a terrifying diving comp. Again, with Shen, Rengar, Echo, all of your front line needs to focus on helping your back line because these guys are there. Echo is in your back line. Shen is in your back line. Rengar has already killed your AD carry somewhere off to the side. It's so terrifying. And it was just such a good, scary comp coming from TSM. And the support that Shen and Karma could kind of bring off there. And the fact that they could, pull off this really nice 1-3-1 comp with Bjergsen pulling that teleport, as well as obviously the Shen double teleport, the teleport and his ult. It was such a bully comp. It was great. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I agree. I love seeing any team really, but of course TSM in particular, playing a team comp that's centered around we're just going to kill you till we win. And that's really the feeling I got from this game. Of course, there was tons of 1-3-1 pressure. I mean, like you said, the ability to instantly collapse on people with three TPs if you're counting Shin's ult and his teleport, but instantly collapse on a team fight and shift it in their direction. But I mean, you know, at any given moment in time, an arrow comes flying out of nowhere, and then there's a knife cat in your face, and now you're dead. And you know, TSM trades an objective off of it. So game 2, I think, kind of straightforward. They killed P1 a lot. Total kills were 18. I think we were ahead by about 10k gold at the end of it. But Harry, you want to go a bit more in depth on Hauntzer Shin? Because I think he had, to me, one of the more impressive Shin performances I've seen in a very long time.
I mean, like, maybe I'm disappointing some people, but like, I do think he played well in position and well, and his talents were on point, but I don't know. I mean, it's Shen. Like, it's a kind of a simple champion. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's fair.
you know, it's not like he went off on like a Fior or something. Like, sure, he did his job. He positioned well in team fights, but you gotta realize, it also depends on your carries killing the people killing you, right? And TSM's target selection was good this game. I think that I actually thought Wild Turtle had a pretty good game. I thought the bot lane a much better game in general this game. I thought the target selection was just much more on point. I think we were able to really get to the Kha'Zix and the Corki. We weren't able. Arrow played well, but he wasn't able to kill the Shen, obviously. And that's another problem. This team comp for Phoenix 1. How are you going to kill the Shen? You have literally no. There's nothing that kills the Shen in this team comp. There's nothing that really comes close.
Yeah, and what's actually an interesting callback is this P1 comp in their game 2 is actually the exact same problem that TSM exhibited in game 1 with their Corki and Jin pick, where they had absolutely no way to kill the tanks. And I think it's actually kind of funny that we see the exact same problem on the other side.
And there's a reason for that. I think assassins are very strong right now for three main reasons. Courage of the Colossus is still strong, in my opinion. It's not taken every time, but it's still a pretty strong choice. 2, assassins are meta. 3, 80 carries right now that are in the meta cannot kill tanks for shit. Ashe is probably the closest to kind of a tank killer, maybe, but Varus is a really mediocre tank killer, and so is Jin. And so teams can end up really struggling unless they have like something that can really burst and take down, like a Cassiopeia, and that's why you see a lot of scaling mid laners that have a lot more consistent damage, like Azir, Ryze, even Cass. You know, these aren't really bursty champions. These are more wear you down champions, right? They build tier and they do all that, and even Corki to some extent, even though he's like a great tank killer, can kind of fulfill that role. But yeah, I think that's a really easy problem to run into right now. Just like in some metas, teams will find themselves without a tank because tanks just generally aren't playing the top lane for whatever reasons, and you know you'll go for your draft, and by the end you realize, wait, we don't have a tank. And so yeah, I think that might be a problem teams are running into drafting this meta. But I think the big story of this team comp is that our 1-3-1 is just so immense, especially with the Shen, with the Echo and the Shen in the side lanes. It's just so hard to stop. There's really no tools Phoenix 1 has for that either, and so you're left wondering, okay, well, what is this comp supposed to do? And the answer is get Kha'Zix ahead, maybe win the game by 30 minutes, hopefully. But it really felt like I don't think TSM frankly played great this game, but I think their team comp was just so damn good. It was so hard to lose the game. Just the sheer amount of pressure that this comp defaults to is insane. So yeah, I for sure think that this team comp, I mean, I won't say it's impossible to lose with, because anything is possible in North America, but
right.
yeah,
We
this
are the
is
land
a
of dreams.
damn strong comp that's really hard to lose with. I think it's really simple. I think it's just hard to fuck up, honestly. That's just what it is at the end of the day. So
Yeah, and I agree. And kind of touching on what you were discussing in terms of pick ban, where I think it is easy to kind of look up and say, "Oh crap, what did we just do?" And I think we saw a shining example of that in Game 3 with P1's pick ban, where they took the misfortune early without seeing TSM pick any of the support picks that you take support misfortune into. So early in their rotations, P1 picks up the support misfortune for Adrian, and so TSM, for one reason or another, decides to ban out the two reasons that you pick support misfortune, which are Malzahar and Zyra. Now all of a sudden you have a truthfully unsafe support pick for Adrian. Biofrost picks up his Thresh, and we'll get into the many ways that he picked apart and kind of flexed his muscles with Thresh very shortly. But I think that this pick ban from P1 was not quite as bad as that Camille pick ban we saw from CLG, because that's going to be really hard to top in terms of bad pick ban. But I think that this pick ban from them was kind of an example of jumping the gun, because then they flexed the Jace down the mid. They took the Rumble top, which I mean is a fairly decent pick in the Poppy, from my personal knowledge. I don't know that that's certified by any professional analyst or anything, but yeah, Cantos, I guess talk to me a bit about Phoenix One's pick ban and that strange support misfortune pick without any of the responses from TSM.
Congratulations, P1. You played yourself. That's really all I could think at kind of the end of this pick ban is it felt like they were trying to. There's two ways to draft, and the greatest of teams can do both of these at the same time. The one way to draft is to outpick the enemy team. So that's pretty much push your team comp in a way that pushes away an enemy team comp that would be very strong. And then there's the way that you draft for yourself and you draft for your own team. So you draft a comp that you want to play. And again, the best teams are able to do both, where they can kind of draft away from an enemy team while drafting for themselves. This draft was not like that. It was so. They were so focused on trying to take away the things that were important to TSM, but not even the right things that were important to TSM. They really tried to take away the Ivern. It felt like we can take that away from Svenskeren, so he doesn't have that Ivern. But Inori clearly is not very comfortable on Ivern. The Jace pick, it kind of seemed like alright, well, I can kind of play this top and I can run this. And then as soon as they saw, there's a Poppy there, I probably can't play this against the Poppy, so I guess we'll pick the Rumble. Like, it seems so all over the place. The Misfortune pick, I still don't know if Arrow was trying to cheese and bring out that Misfortune 80 carry, kind of like I believe FlyQuest did it. And then TSM's, their second ban phase was just now you're stuck. So if they decided, all right, let's do a Misfortune Zyra, and they won't be able to pick Misfortune support to counter that Zyra, like it's this huge deal, and that's the only thing that can counter a Zyra support. I don't know if TSM then banned Malzahar Zyra, which are two of the things that MF support is good against, and said Trollolol, now you have to play it as a support. I don't know. It seemed like they were trying really hard to outdraft TSM, and they ended up just outdrafting themselves. Nobody looked super comfortable, except for maybe Arrow on Ashe, but other than that, really nobody looked overly comfortable with the champions that they picked. The comp didn't really feel that good. Ivern is really strong for getting people into a fight, and with a Rumble and a Jace and an Ashe and a Misfortune, you don't really want to be in the middle of a fight. So it didn't feel as good as they were going for. Again, it really seemed like they were trying really hard to outdraft TSM and ended up just outdrafting themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And on the topic of kind of playing yourself, very early on in the game, we had Inori doing something that didn't make a whole lot of sense, even watching it on VODs. I mean, we kind of discussed it in our prep, but I really want to kind of dig deep into Inori's strange choice of pathing, and since Svenskeren really just kind of being opportunistic and saying, well, since you're here, I may as well pick up this first blood. So just to kind of set the scene, Inori picked up Ivern jungle. Ivern is a very unique jungler in that his jungle pathing can vary very wildly. I mean, if you're playing a more common jungler like Lee Sin, you can get creative with your pathing kind of after you do certain things. So you pick up your first buff, you maybe take another camp, you take a second buff, and then you do something else. Or you pick up a first buff and then you go gank a lane. With Ivern, he can throw all those rules out the window. He can set himself up to take 2 camps, walk over to yours, auto smite it, do his little troll stroll away, and, you know, really throw a wrench in conventional jungle plans. But in this game, Inori starts at his red and waltzes over to Sven's blue buff and finds out that there's a murder bug waiting in the bushes. And Sven picks up the first blood and he gets to keep his blue buff, obviously. And both Harry and Kantos, I kind of want to open up this discussion in general because I also want to kind of, I guess, look at Ivern as a pick and how it's affecting the jungle. Starting with you, Harry, what was going through your mind when you saw Inori strolling across the river to be murdered by Sven Skaren?
I don't know. At first, I thought it was just a really smart level 1 by the TSM as a team. And then I think that as we studied jungle pathing, we just thought, was this actually genius or was this Inori just being a dumbass? And when it comes to game 3 of series games, I think there is definitely mind games going on in jungle pathing at that point. And maybe Inori played himself, just like Phoenix One played themselves in the draft, they also played themselves into level 1. And yeah, a blind invade of the blue buff is definitely ambitious versus a Kha'Zix. Admittedly, a lot of Kha'Zix do go to Wolves, I think, before going to the blue buff, but still, it is really risky. And I think that it's really hard to say because I don't like touching jungle pathing usually because I think it's a very there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. There's scouting reports about jungle pathing. This is probably the part of the game I think teams perhaps most strategically think about in the early game, post lane swap world. So I really do think that when we're touching this, we're going to some very complex theory, and junglers in LCS are obviously they're very intelligent. You have to be pretty intelligent to be an LCS jungler in my opinion. But yeah, it doesn't really seem to make sense. Like it just seems like an unnecessary risk, and he really could just go take his own blue buff, and it really wouldn't matter. It just seemed like an unnecessary, unwarranted risk. And Sven took advantage by seeing he did start blue buff, and he predicted the invade. So, I mean, and he had to make sure he protected his own blue buff. And so, yeah, I think it's a bit of both. Well played by Sven, and Inori probably maybe mind gamed himself a little bit. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't want to dive too deep into personally, I don't like diving deep into jungle pathing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the excellent things about jungling is that the effects of early game stuff can really spill over into the mid and late game. And Kantos, one of the ways that we saw this was TSM got 6 total dragons in this game. I mean, including Elder, we had 3 Ocean and 2 Mountain, and what a dragon setup for staying alive and knocking things over. So I guess in your opinion, how much of that early decision to try and invade Sven at his blue kind of snowballed into TSM's immaculate dragon control and being able to just wipe P1 across the map, really?
Well, Ivern, just the way that Inori was playing him, the way that Inori was building him, Ivern was not a threat. He just wasn't a threatening jungler. So think objectives like, the dragons, they were easy, essentially. There's nothing really to contest with that, especially when you have like a Kha'Zix, and you don't have anybody else on P1 that can do a whole lot. Your scariest thing is the Rumble that can kind of get you stuck inside of a pit somewhere, but with Dragon, you're able to pull that out, and at that point you're almost safe. So on top of that, we were just rotating throughout the map really, really nicely. 5 dragons is huge. I don't think that TSM has had 5 dragons like that in a while. And then of course the 6th with the Elder Dragon. It was really insane objective control. I could only imagine what it had been if instead of Mountain it had been Infernal, or if instead of Ocean it had been Infernal, where the damage was just even stronger. I think Sven Skaren would have probably popped off to the point where he would have at that point peaked and then declined in a single game throughout his. He would have just gone absolutely apeshit. So the dragon control that we had there was just, it was a glimpse of summer 2016 TSM, and it made me so happy, because it was like, this is the objective control that we've been looking for. This is the map play and the macro that we've been waiting for. So I'm going to hold that game to a high standard of TSM, and really hope that games continue like that, where we're able to have that kind of map control. I'm not going to expect 5 dragons every single time, but I still want to see that kind of pressure, that kind of macro, that kind of rotation to have those objectives like we used to have. At this point, I believe we're one of the lowest for getting first dragon, if we get one
we're
at
terrible
all.
at it.
And that's just so unlike how we were, again, 2016 summer TSM. It's just so unusual. We used to make really great plays and then kind of turn it around. And a lot of that is our lack of bot lane pressure, and we kind of have to focus on top a little bit more, because that's where our winning lanes are, is top and mid. But I really want to see more of what we saw in this third game in terms of dragon control and objective control. It was just awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of sending it over to you, Harry, one of the on the topic of objective control, you and I were going on and on about how brilliant that Rise play was from Bjergsen. And I think we saw something really similar this week with that Elder Dragon to Baron play, where they had Turtle, Sven, and Biofrost near Baron as Bjergsen and Hanser snuck the Elder Dragon. You want to kind of set that play up for us and run down what it ended up meaning for the rest of that game?
Okay, sure. So I think what was going on was check the comps real quick. So we had a Varus, we had a I don't think it was Kha'Zix, I think it was Poppy that was with Bjergsen, right? Okay. Yeah. So Varus, Kha'Zix, and Fresh were hanging around the mid/Baron range, and they were threatening. And they were just kind of there, they were kind of there. It's like, hey, we're here, you can't take Baron. And the other team, when they see Orianna, Poppy, one of two things could be going on. They could be being, or they could be taking Elder Drake. Okay, so scenario 1, what if they're being? Well, obviously we can't take Baron, that'd be suicidal, it'd be a 5v5, why would we do that, right? That option B is if they're taking Elder Drake, we'd have to rotate around TSM's free man, which is that we'd take a lot of poke doing so, and likely force a 5v5 that we would lose. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. I think the only thing you can really do in this situation, if you're Phoenix 1, is to bait Baron. I think would be probably the proper response. I don't think you should go in and try to take Baron, try to turn. TSM gets too close, blow flashes, whatever. I'm assuming they had flashes up for this play. I don't have the VOD right in front of me, but yeah, that's what I would do as Phoenix 1. But despite that, it does take a very decisive team to do it. And if Phoenix 1's doesn't slouch in the macro sense, don't get me wrong, but it's still a very hard call to make in the heat of the moment in Game 3. So it was a very good call by TSM. It really didn't have... The only downside was a Baron bait, but even then, if you play it right, you don't lose to a Baron bait, you just maybe waste time, and they're able to cancel the play. But it was a very good decisive call by TSM. It was smart because early in the season, the series, I think they gave up a Baron because they all-in on an Elder Drake, and it just wasn't worth it actually in the end. And I think Phoenix 1 got a window back. I think this was Game 2. I think they got a window back into the game. But yeah, so it was a cool adaptation. I think it was a mid-series adaptation, and it showed really good, cool growth for the team, I think, and it showed better backer sets as the series went on.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that kind of like what you said, Kantos. I'm hoping that we continue to see this strategic evolution of TSM. We can all comfortably say that TSM is definitely taking a step back in terms of aggression. I mean, like you guys said, we're among the worst in terms of early dragon control in the league, which is so counterintuitive for what we saw from TSM last split. But I think if we can continue to take advantage of situations like this, where in the spur of the moment, whoever is making the call at that time is able to say, we can put them in this situation and they lose no matter what they do, I think that we'll start to see TSM really develop as a strategic team. Kind of on the talk of strategy though, one player particularly stood out to me for being uncommonly out of position. I mean, Wild Turtle, a lot of times he was a little too far forward. He was free farming and, there'd be a Kha'Zix or whatever that would jump on him. But Bjergsen's positioning this weekend had a lot of question marks going on, particularly in his Azir game as well as in the P1 series. But I personally, my mind goes back to his Azir game where there were plenty of times he ended up going 5-0 and 7, but a lot of times he was escaping by the skin of his teeth, where he was dead to rights and he happened to be able to slide out a little bit. And I want to ask both of you, starting with you, Cantos, do you think that this is kind of a callback to the downtrend we saw from Bjergsen when he had to take on more shot calling roles, or was this just one bad weekend?
Yeah, we saw a lot of weird positioning decisions from Bjergsen. Obviously, in the Cloud9, or not, I'm sorry, the CLG game, that face check on Corki, which turned around that entire game in game one. It was such a bad face check. And then we saw some struggling with the P1 game on his Cassiopeia on the side lanes. He was, pushing up with no vision there, and like you said, with the Azir games, he was just kind of sliding out of there barely in these weird positions that Azir probably shouldn't be in. I think that's a piece of it, is that now that he's taking on more of that shot calling role, he's kind of focusing on the rest of the map, and it's tough for him to kind of focus on his individual play. And I think on top of that, he's kind of feeling the lack of pressure in that bot lane. So before, if Bjergsen was kind of behind, or if he was, not doing that great, he could make a really great roam down bot, and he knew that Double Lift and Biofrost would be able to kind of get him the assists or the kills to kind of bring him back in that game. He could make that good roam, he could make that good dragon play, and at this point, he's just kind of stuck there. He just kind of chills in mid, and there's not really a whole lot that he's able to successfully do. And at the same time, like you said, he's just trying to call the rest of the game. So I definitely think it was an off weekend for Bjergsen. He was definitely struggling, and we could kind of see that. But I'm really hoping that it's not a trend that continues. He's obviously one of the best mechanically, one of the best mids in the world, and I really want to see him. Essentially, I want to see the team kind of step up a little more so he can focus on his laning and his play, and kind of bring himself back to that all-star player that we've been seeing for years on TSM.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. I think that that's a piece of it. One of the things that's actually interesting, before I throw it over to you, Harry, I'll just kind of add in as a tidbit, was there was actually, I think Parth did his first interview maybe with Travis. He actually had a very interesting breakdown of the evolution of shot calling, and how there's this misconception that there's one person who shot calls and everybody just listens, and how he as the coach is trying to push TSM towards more of a communal shot calling thing, where it's whoever can make the best call needs to understand why that's the best call and communicate it to the team, and then the team can as a unit act around it, so it's like 5 minds instead of one. And he also brought up that would kind of change based on who's playing what. So if Hunter's playing a carry top, he'd make different calls based on when he's playing a tank top. And I kind of want to compare with you, Harry. I kind of want to compare Bjergsen's positioning this weekend to Biofrost, actually, because Biofrost had a great weekend every time he got Thresh. I mean, he had that amazing play mid where he hooked a Jace out of mid-air to save Svenskeren, which I personally don't think I've ever seen the Thresh do. I didn't even know that the damage was calculated that way, where Jace had to hit the ground for the damage to apply. But I think that we saw a very comfortable Biofrost and at times a very uncomfortable Bjergsen. And Harry, I'm wondering what are your thoughts on, I guess, the way TSM is playing with certain picks and how it's showing up in maybe even some of the mistakes that they're making.
Okay, so I think that Fresh is a comfort pick for Biofrost. So I think as Biofrost gets more and more experience under his belt, he becomes a more and more seasoned player. Let's face it, in a split from now, he's basically a veteran in LCS terms. He's going to take more of the shot calling role. He understands the game at a deeper level, and this Fresh pick I think really allows him to just look around the map. And he doesn't. It's like when you play solo queue. One of the big reasons you don't play new picks, for one, you probably don't even understand the champion. The second part is, you'd want to focus on where you are on the map and what you're doing rather than what your champion's doing, if that makes any sense. So I think Biofrost, while I don't think he's focusing on like, oh my god, how does Zyra Q work? he's just a lot more. It's like some champions and some players are just second nature at some point, and you really can really deeply think about what's going on the map and also play your champion at a very high level, which I think Biofrost might be doing right now. So I'm wondering if right now, whenever Biofrost gets that fresh, he feels a lot more comfortable making calls, being aggressive for the team, being a voice. Bjergsen, frankly, he's just never been the shot caller, frankly. Like, if we're gonna be honest here, he's just never been known for it, you know. And I just don't think maybe he has the greatest macro mind ever. Obviously, he's always gonna be one of the greatest roamers, laners ever to play in North America. But at the same time, does he understand how side lanes work at a deep enough level while playing the game, while playing in front of 100,000 people, whatever? You have to take these considerations into mind, and I'm not sure if Bjergsen's that player. And maybe Biofrost is actually, maybe he's, there's a lot of really good shot caller supports out there. And obviously it is a team thing, but there's varying amounts of shot calling going on in the team, obviously. So I think that Biofrost, maybe he steps up and he's just like, okay, you know what? I got split on my route. I'm an LCS champion. I know how this game works. I understand this game, and I'm gonna play. The TSM's gonna play my way now. We're gonna play aggressive. We're gonna shout for double lift every time we go into a team fight. For daddy. So, so yeah, I think obviously that's pure speculation, but I'm interested to see Biofrost further growth as a player and potentially as a star on this roster, because I mean, he's still having a good split. I mean, he's still probably a top 3 support in North America right now. So I mean, yeah, I think it's his time to maybe say, you know what, I am a high level player and I deserve to be in all these games, and I am a clutch big time player. And I think that's I think that if we see that out of Biofrost this season, I'll be really, really happy with where he gets without double lift.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think this upcoming week will actually be another chance for Biofrost, as well as the entirety of TSM, to really, really flex both their laning competence as well as their strategic competence. So this coming weekend in LCS, we have TSM versus NV and TSM versus Echo Fox. Starting with NV, they've been looking unimpressive, is the word that I'll use.
They looked
so
slightly better last week, to be fair. They had to play Cloud9, which was always going to be a slaughter. But but they beat Liquid. God, okay, Liquid's... It hurts. It hurts. They're so bad. Oh my god. But oh man. But anyway, they beat Liquid 2-0 pretty convincingly, to their credit. I don't think they're a joke team anymore. I think I said once that they're like not even a team. I think they're a respectable team. Their macro isn't great, but they're an okay laning team. They could keep up, and they won't roll over and die, in my opinion. But I think they need to be respected. But at the same time, TSM should really be looking into 2-0.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the NV game we should definitely be looking at 2-0. And Kantos, real quick, what are your thoughts going into this Echo Fox game? Because I mean, we got Bjergsen versus Froggen, which to me is always a very entertaining matchup, and we have Hanser versus Looper. So Hanser's up against another world famous Korean top lane player. So I'm really curious. What are your thoughts going into this Echo Fox match, and how are you expecting TSM to win, as it were?
Well, it's going to depend. Are we seeing week 1 and week 3 Echo Fox? Are we seeing week 2 Echo Fox? It's Echo Fox have the ability to be one of the better teams in the league, and then more often than not kind of choke and end up being one of the worst teams in the league. So I don't really have any concerns about Envy. I have a few more about Echo Fox, but I definitely think that at the end of the day, we are the better team. We are the stronger team. In terms of not only individual laning, but as well as macro and team fighting, I definitely think that we should be able to take the games off of them. It should be a 2-0, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 2-1. So it's just, again, it's going to depend on which Echo Fox really shows up this weekend. But I'm not overly worried about them. I think it should be entertaining, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking forward to this being a bit more of a relaxing weekend, because the weekend after that we get Cloud9 and Flight Quest, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to say about those.
We'll have a lot more to say about those teams. That's gonna be the death week.
Right. That's going to be where TSM really proves how far they've grown from week one TSM to today. But that's going to wrap up our league portion real quick. In upcoming TSM news and other esports, we have the LAN ETS February 10th through 12th. Leffen will be playing in the Melee tournament, and I don't see Zero on the registered participants under the Smash 4 players. So I don't know if maybe he'll be a last minute entrant or if he's just not going to this tournament at all. But Leffen will be in attendance. So if you're a fan of Smash Melee, be sure to tune into it, support TSM no matter where the brand is. And outside of that, upcoming in more Smash news, we have B7, which, you know, if you loved a few weeks ago, Kantos and I were gushing about Leffen versus Mango, and I'm really kind of expecting B7 to be a little bit more of that, where we just get to see incredibly high level matches from Leffen. And also, I'm fairly certain Zero will be playing that weekend, but don't quote me on it quite yet. I don't know that I have a way to confirm that. But Harry, Kantos, if you guys have any other things you want to slide in here before we wrap up?
No, not really. I think that about covers it.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm really encouraged by this weekend's TSM. I think that TSM knows their flaws, and I think that they did a really good job stepping up and kind of covering some of those. So I really hope we continue to see more progress. But yeah.
All right, sounds good. So that'll be it from us on this week's episode of Just Tiltum. If you made it this far into the podcast, thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to leave us any feedback that you want to, whether that be on the Reddit post, the YouTube, wherever you can leave a comment to give us feedback. We all openly welcome it. We want to make this the best podcast that we can, and we hope that you'll give us a listen next week. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.